On this edition of Native Report, we travel to the United Nations headquarters in New York City and learn why the passage of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is of global importance. We meet James Anderson, whose story of overcoming a speech disorder is inspirational. And we meet kickboxer Reuben St John as he trains to defend his title. We also learn something new about Indian country and hear from our elders on this Native Report.
Production of Native Report is made possible by grants from the Shakopee Metawakanton Sioux Community, the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, the Blandin Foundation, and the Grotto Foundation.
Welcome to Native Report. I'm Stacy Thunder. According to the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, there are over 370 million Indigenous peoples globally. After many years of negotiations, in 2007, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples by an overwhelming majority. As part of the larger global community of Indigenous peoples, Native nations across Indian country have a presence at the United Nations.
I was born and raised on my people's territory, which is the Onondaga Nation, which is about 300 miles northwest of New York City. And right now we're at the United Nations at the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and I am the North American Regional Representative for the Permanent Forum. And which is really great is the community of the Onondaga Nation is here. Quite a few people from the nation, the women and many of the chiefs and representatives are here in support of my position, and also here learning and networking and talking to governments and listening to what exactly is going on here at the UN in terms of Indigenous peoples, because we're talking about several issues in terms of women, in terms of economic development, in terms of environment, in terms of the celebration of the second decade of the world's Indigenous peoples. So there's lots going on, a lot of activity. There's over 2,000 people here, close to 3,000, I'm told, several UN agencies, and many, many governments. So there's quite a bit of activity, and we're trying to keep on top of it. The Permanent Forum has 16 members, and 8 of the members are state appointed, meaning nation appointed, and 8 of the members are brought forward by their communities. Once you're brought forward by your community, the president of the Economic and Social Council makes the final decision, because the Permanent Forum is a subsidiary body of the Economic and Social Council.
The Permanent Forum is an advisory body with a mandate to discuss Indigenous issues related to economic and social development, culture, the environment, education, health, and human rights.
The idea of the Permanent Forum was actually discussed by Indigenous peoples while the Working Group on Indigenous Populations was doing its sessions. We had a meeting in 1992 in Chimaltenango in Guatemala, and it was upon the invitation of Rigoberta Menchutum. And several Indigenous leaders from all over the world came together to decide what should be the key programs of the first international decade of the world's Indigenous people. And we agreed that one of the things we should push for is the establishment of a permanent forum on Indigenous peoples. And we made a strategy that during the 1993 World Human Rights Conference, this idea will be proposed. And it was proposed by the representative of the Greenland Home Rule government, and it was adopted, and that's when the working expert working groups on the permanent forum was established.
One key document adopted by the General Assembly is the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, but it has yet to be supported by the United States.
I think the Native Americans here should really work very hard on the new administration to get the United States to, number one, reverse its position on the UN Declaration and endorse its adoption, you know, like what the Australians did. So I hope there will be concerted efforts on the part of the Native Americans to work on that. And secondly, to also make sure that the U.S. government is not really allowing, is going to monitor also closely the way the corporations, U.S. corporations are behaving outside of the United States. Because I know that they are also not adhering to human rights standards with the Native American communities, but I think they are doing doubly worse when they are out of the United States. So I really hope that that kind of solidarity is established so that we will really get these corporations to behave in a way which is consistent with human rights standards.
Before the session began, a special presentation was held honoring Indigenous women, tying into the theme of human rights.
This year, one of the areas that we are looking into are the implementation on the recommendations related to Indigenous women. In the third session of the forum, the theme was on Indigenous women, and every year it's a cross-cutting issue. So there are many recommendations, and so it was a good thing that the Indigenous women decided to create a circle to do this as a ritual before the formal opening of the forum happens, because that sort of gives a clear message that Indigenous women are equal partners in making the forum work as well as addressing issues of Indigenous peoples all over the world.
The appointment to the permanent forum is on a voluntary basis, and representatives find that issues confronted by Indigenous peoples are similar.
One challenge that is it's difficult to blame one country, but that's the climate change, because it's quite a dramatic up in the north, even if it's not so dramatic as among the Inuits. But still, the nature is changing. This means also that there's going to be a big challenge to traditional Sami livelihood as fishing, reindeer herding. And it's quite not easy to predict what is going to really happen. So it's going to be a very, very big challenge just now, but also maybe even more in the future. If you compare the Samis, of course, in that context, we are a quite privileged indigenous peoples because nobody's killing us. But if you see, we are fighting about the rights to the lands, waters, right to use our own language. So it's the same fight as many other indigenous people are conducting now, even it's maybe more civilized in the Nordic countries. But it's the same game.
That's why we have the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which needs to become a covenant, which needs to become common law, so that governments throughout the world will be held accountable to our right to self-determination, to our political, our civil, our economic, and our cultural rights.
Did you know the United Nations has a permanent forum on Indigenous issues? The forum has a mandate to discuss Indigenous matters related to economic and social development, as well as the environment, education, health, and human rights. Some trace this forum back to 1923 when a North American tribal leader named Chief Tuskahe traveled to Geneva to speak to the League of Nations to defend the rights of his people to live under their own laws and under their own faith. He was not allowed to speak. Similarly, a Maori religious leader from New Zealand also traveled to the League of Nations in 1925 to protest the breaking of a treaty that had given the Maori a right to ownership of their lands. He was denied access to the League of Nations. In 1982, a working group on Indigenous populations began at the United Nations. Finally, in 2007, a Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was adopted by the UN General Assembly. This declaration is said to be the most comprehensive statement of the rights to Indigenous people ever developed.
Overcoming a speech disorder was a turning point for James Anderson. The son of Dave Anderson, CEO of Famous Dave's Barbecue, was, by his own admission, a shy youngster who would stutter and stammer when he felt under stress. Today, James is a published author, a trainer, a speaker, and an inspiration.
That a son is able to do this for his own father. And with that, I bring James Anderson.
Bonjour, Anin. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Long before...
The self-confidence that James Anderson exhibits when speaking in public wasn't always there. Growing up, he hid behind an invisible wall, shielding his lack of self-esteem.
I never realized that I was shy or anything like that until really middle school, when I started playing small and I stopped wanting to do well in school, and I was just scared. I was living a scared life. But it came to a head when you had to take mandatory public speaking class. And basically I stuttered through the whole semester giving my speeches, and it wasn't a big deal. Nobody laughed or made fun of me or anything like that. It's just what James did. It's just what I did. And the final speech of the year was your top 5 memorable moments from public speaking class. And I gave my speech, everybody gave their speech. One of the last people was kind of the class funny guy. And he wasn't an enemy of mine or anything like that. We weren't good friends either. But he got up there, and his number 3 top 5 memorable moment from public speaking class was James's verbal clutter and stuttering.
He accepted the notion that he may not possess the best speaking skills, yet he was a student leader while in high school and college.
I was challenged by my coaches to say, hey, you need to be more of a vocal leader. Okay. And I had to think, because I was a smart kid, but I'd use my smarts to pump up this wall of no self-esteem. What I did is I said to this young high jumper, this was in college, I said, hey, you know what? He was going to be captain next year. It was pretty much sealed up because he was good. He was a good leader. And I said, hey, you should do this. You should do this. Why don't you come up here and lead everybody? He kind of looked at me. The whole team looked at me. What's going on here? You lead it. And he did. And I played it off as, I'm developing the leaders behind me. Who can argue with that, you know?
That all changed with a phone call from his dad.
He said, you got to go to this Tony Robbins thing. Well, who's Tony Robbins? Well, he's this personal development guru. You'll love it. You just got to go. I don't want to go. See if you can get your time off, because you're going. It's in Denver. You got to go. I was like, fine. I've never been to Denver before. I'll go. There I was, outside of the Denver Convention Center, where there was 600 people just waiting to get into their big auditorium. And inside the doors, you could hear the bass going on. And people were at the doors pounding to get in. And I was like, what is going on here?
Robin's presentation made a huge impression upon James. He thought about the missed opportunities.
The third day, all of a sudden, I'm looking around, and once again, I look around, all these people are just into it. People have had breakthroughs just as I have, and are starting to talk positive and strong. You could tell they've changed just by how they're holding themselves. You can see it in their face. I'm looking around. I'm probably I don't know this for sure, but I'm pretty sure I'm the only American Indian in this audience. And I'm like, how can we compete in today's world by not hearing these messages? Us Native people, we have opportunities too. But it's our thinking that hurts us. And that's not just Natives, it's all people. So I want to develop world-class leadership trainings, workshops, and keynote speeches, and bring world-class, because that's what Tony was. People were paying $600 a seat just for the cheap seats. And so this big money people were coming to this. So I said, I want to do this, but I want to do it in a level where us Native people aren't priced out of it, that they should hear these messages. So that's how the Life Skills Center for Leadership was created.
Today, James is a motivational speaker and a trainer. He cites his father as being a champion in his life, but he also recognizes another hero who made an impact upon him.
My grandpa, Jim, he's full-blooded Choctaw from Oklahoma. And I remember growing up, him telling stories of school and learning, and how when he was orphaned by the BIA and sent to Haskell School for Indians, whenever when we know the horrible stories that come out of there, beaten for speaking your language, cutting of the hair, all these just horrible stories, I didn't hear those stories from him. All I heard from him about school was the value that he learned. And there is no greater strength than the ability to let go of your anger for the betterment of those who are coming behind.
Termination for the Menominee people, I think, in my opinion, was a disastrous experiment on the government's behalf. Right. An example of that is I was in school at the time. I was in junior high in 1961. I remember the date, April 30th, 1961. I was in junior high school in Shawano, and prior to that time, the tribe always paid for the school lunches for the Menominee students. And I was in homeroom that day, and my homeroom teacher, he would always collect the money for the lunch. And with the Menominee students, he would just check us off because it was always that the tribe had paid for it. Well, on this particular day when he did that, he called myself and several of the other Menominee students that were in that homeroom up to his desk and wanted to know where our money was for our lunch. And we're all like, what? What do you mean? And he says, well, you're not Indians anymore. You have to pay for your lunch. And I was in like 8th grade at the time. I didn't really understand what this was all about, and I didn't think the other Menominee students in that class did either. So I remember that particular day. And I remember in years after that, we'd go out into the community, and there would be other Native students there from other tribes that were in school. And they would always tell us, tell the Menominee students, well, you're not Indians anymore, And that can have an effect on you psychologically and otherwise. But I remember that, those kinds of things happening.
Motivation is a key part of training for any sport. For kickboxer Reuben St John, he had to stay motivated due to the fact he is often by himself, save for his trainer, while he is stretching, hitting the kick bag, or lifting weights. Kickboxing may be a physical sport and being in shape is important, but there is a psychological element that is just as essential.
Kickboxer Reuben St John couldn't resist the sound of the bell. After taking time off from the combat sport, he found he missed the training and what he calls fun.
My fighter, Reuben St John, has fought for me for years. And I know he wanted to get back in the sport. He took some time off like most fighters do. I did. He took some time off and then he'd come back and he said, I want to fight again, because he comes to some of my fight shows and he got interested again. And I said, well, you got to train Reuben. And Reuben was a few pounds overweight. I said, you got to do the work, man. You got to come in and train and make weight. So he had enough fights in his background that where we could approach another fighter and say, hey, do you want to fight for a title? So that person accepted the fight right away. So Reuben had to lose some pounds and train. And Reuben could have did more road work, but he did enough to survive. And fortunately for him, became a champion.
I was first introduced to martial arts through his Taekwondo classes that he held. Then from there on I went to a karate tournament, my first ever, and it was a pretty good sized one. Took second in that event. I would have took first, but my mom had me in such a rush I forgot my karate belt right there on the counter. And he said after that, he asked me if I'd like to come in and work with one of his kickboxers that he had. It was PJ Schmidt. So I came in, worked with her, and then he brought me in to watch one of his fights, and I said, yeah, I'm pretty interested. I think I want to do this. So I got into that and been training, and I've loved it ever since.
On this day, St. John prepares for his next bout when he defends his title.
When I get here, I'll get into training clothes. I'll do about 3-4 rounds warming up on the bags or shadow kickboxing. Then after that, I'll do some stretching. Ready for more calisthenics, working out. I'll do some shadow boxing, mirror drills, pad work, kicking shields. I'll be doing weight systems here, some light calisthenics, just enough to burn calories and not gain too much muscle. And when you're doing it too, you throw your jokes here and there, but then when you get back to training, it's back to being serious again. Because sometimes when you're here by yourself, it's always hard to stay motivated, but you just gotta dig down deep and tell yourself, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm fighting for this, I gotta work hard. And when I see myself getting tired, you can ask Mr. Anderson sometime that I'll get mad at myself and just push it hard and hard. Then I'll get tired again, break, but then I'll keep pushing hard again.
Motivation is a must for this sport, but experience also plays a role, and that comes in the form of Anderson, who has a few trophies, belts, and titles of his own.
I got the Wisconsin state title, I believe, back in 1985, and fought for a couple more years. Was undefeated, and I fought back in Hinckley probably, I believe it was 2003. I lost my first full contact fight. I actually fought again for another title. Unfortunately, I didn't win that, so I had 2 losses in a row at the casino. And I trained harder and challenged the guy again. And fortunately, I became the victor and won the championship. And I retired. If you're preparing for a fight, you want to train maybe 8 weeks out prior to a fight, 4 weeks minimum, 5 weeks the most. You're talking anywhere from 2 hours to 3 hours of training. What I try to tell my fighters is road work is number one. You got to do your own road work. I don't care if it's 1 mile to 5 miles, you got to do your own road work. You got to come in here, you can hit the bag, but bags don't hit back. So bag work is good for power. You got to get in the ring, you got to shadow kickbox, it's good for timing and balance and control and coordination. You got to do the focus mitts. You got to spar. Spar is number one. Gives you balance, gives you focus, gives you timing, conditioning. Bags don't hit back. You got to have a sparring partner. You got to spar in the sport of kickboxing.
As a promoter, Anderson puts the fight card together, which he starts 3 months before the date, and he has a minimum of 3 shows per year.
It takes a lot of involvement, phone work, a lot of emails, a lot of contacts. I've built up a great contact forum with the fight crowds and the trainers throughout the United States, and as far as Ireland, as far as United Kingdom. Reuben's approached us, and he just wants to do this one-time title fight. He wants to fight for a Minnesota State Championship. We already have a person in mind who's already the current Minnesota State Champion. We have already asked him we challenged him for his title. We have not heard back yet. It's been 2 weeks. Our next fight show, mine, Warriors Fight Promotions, is April 3rd. So Reuben starts training, February 1st, 8 weeks out. He's going to fight for the IKF Minnesota State Championship. So he wants that. And then from there, we're headed for Florida in mid-July for the World Championships.
St. John appreciates the support of fans, and he encourages more participation in the sport.
It's a lot of fun. If you'd like, we can train for competition. It'd be up to your parents, of course. All parents will be worried for their kids on their first competition, as my mom was. Oh, and we were at Grandma Sports Bar and Grill on my debut. I heard her over the whole crowd. But yeah, kids can come on in here. It'll keep them out of trouble because they'll be too tired to do anything. Then being here, they're staying out of trouble. And what I'd like to do is get more out here. The more people, the better. Not just for numbers or anything like that, but you know, to letting the people know that, hey, there's more out here that us kids are doing more than just what they think.
I think Reuben St. John's a great role model for the youth. Dresses well, he takes care of himself, he works, he comes in and trains, stays out of trouble. So if other youth are looking to get into kickboxing and want to compete, well, follow Reuben St. John's footsteps, come to Warriors Gym, and we'll train you.
For more information about Native Report or the stories we've covered, look for us on the web at nativereport.org. Thank you for spending this time with your friends and neighbors in Indian Country. I'm Stacy Thunder. See you next time on Native Report.
Stacy Thunder is an enrolled member of and legal counsel for the Red Lake Nation. And Tad Johnson is an enrolled member of the Boys Fort Band of Ojibwe and is Solicitor General for the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. Production of Native Report is made possible by grants from the Shakopee Metawakanton Sioux Community, the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, the Blandin Foundation, and the Grotto Foundation.
For more information about Native Report or the stories we've covered, look for us on the web at nativereport.org. Thank you for spending this time with your friends and neighbors in Indian Country. I'm Stacy Thunder. See you next time on Native Report.
Stacy Thunder is an enrolled member of and legal counsel for the Red Lake Nation. And Tad Johnson is an enrolled member of the Boys Fort Band of Ojibwe and is Solicitor General for the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. Production of Native Report is made possible by grants from the Shakopee Metawakanton Sioux Community, the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, the Blandin Foundation, and the Grotto Foundation.